Good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Raven Investigates. Tonight, we will be traveling to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and looking into another case of a life lost much too early. Tonight's case starts with a child making an innocent-seeming statement that may have been the exact words leading to the end of his life. It involves investigative failure when handling a confession, a killer potentially taunting police in multiple ways, and a father that never gave up trying to solve his son's homicide. Tonight, we will be investigating the unsolved murder of Gary Grant Jr. The day is Thursday, January 12th, 1984. 7-year-old Gary Grant Jr. has the day off from school thanks to a teacher's conference, leaving him to enjoy the day to himself. He was living with his mother at the time, May, as she and his father, Gary Sr., were separated. While enjoying breakfast, Gary casually mentions to his mother that he had an appointment at 2:30 that afternoon, and that he couldn't tell her anything about it because the details were secret. Seeing as how he was a 7-year-old, May didn't think much of this statement and just let it go. Around noon, Gary went out to play with some of his friends and told his mother that he would be back around 4 p.m. When he failed to return home by 4:30, May began to worry. She went to the house where 2 of his friends lived and asked if he had been there. They said that he was there earlier, but he had left around 4:30 to go home. She continued to wait for an additional 2 hours to see if he would make it home. At this point, it was hitting 6:30 p.m. May then decided to call Gary's father, Police Detective Gary Grant Sr. Once he got the call, he took the night off and intended to scour the area for his son, a search that went until close to 2 in the morning and was ultimately fruitless. By the time Friday morning rolled around, the local police were already mounting their search for Gary Jr. Due to internal policies, Gary Sr. was advised that he could not be part of the official search and investigation. Because of this, he began his own investigation on the side, continuing his search and simply asking people in the neighborhood if they had seen his son. During said investigation, he had found a number of people claimed to have seen Gary that same morning, several hours after he was considered missing. The search continued for the day, with 0 in ways of actual information. The next day, Saturday, January 14th, a local citizen named Robert Huey had a revelation. The child disappeared near a warehouse that he had owned, and from this he decided he would go to search the property. At 3:30 p.m., nearly 48 hours after he had gone missing, Robert made a discovery that would switch this case from a missing person to a homicide. Gary Jr.'s body was found in a vacant lot near the aforementioned warehouse, less than 2 blocks away from his own home. His body had been wrapped in a rug, and the cause of death appeared to be bludgeoning, most likely done with a length of metal pipe that was also found lying near the body. At this time, the police implemented a radio silence, basically stating that no one was to radio this in until the family could be properly notified. In an unfortunate coincidence, Gary Sr., driving, still searching the neighborhood, saw all of the cars in the lot, and then pulled up to the scene where his son's body was found, at nearly the exact time that they had marked it off. On the day that Gary's body was found, the police started questioning everyone in the area. One person that was questioned had mentioned that they saw him alive on Thursday near the junior high school with a boy named Carl Boo Mason. Carl was a developmentally disabled 12-year-old boy that was friends with Gary Jr. When he was questioned, Carl said that he and Gary had been riding their bikes together on Wednesday, and he had planned to meet up with him on Thursday, but Gary never showed up. A statement made in complete opposition to those that interviewed with the police. At this point, Carl was obviously considered suspect, and was taken to the station accompanied by his grandmother. From here, the police took him into a room, not allowing his grandmother to go with him, and began questioning him. His responses were inconsistent, and he frequently changed his story. After several hours, at approximately 3 a.m, he had said that he had been with Gary and that he had hit him, and then left him in the field when he didn't get back up. The police took this statement and typed up a confession for him in their words. They gave the confession to him and his grandmother to sign, despite the fact that Carl was insistent that he did not hurt Gary. He also stated that he signed the confession solely because he was told that if he did, he would get to go home. From here, Carl was charged with murder and placed in a juvenile detention center. On the Sunday following all of this, January 15th, Carl was given a lie detector test that was deemed inconclusive. Then he was given a second lie detector test 3 days later, Wednesday, January 18th. Despite the results being, again, inconclusive, it was agreed that both exams pointed to Carl not being the one that killed Gary, though they were unsure as to whether or not he was telling the truth about not being at the crime scene. A month later, it was determined by a judge that his confession was inadmissible and that his statements were not made voluntarily. From this, all charges against him were dropped. It was almost 2 years later to the day that police would get their next clue in this case. On January 4th, 1986, a message was found written on the door of a police cruiser at 3 a.m. The message read, "Gary Grant is dead, I am living, another will die on 1/12/86 if all goes right." The date written, 1/12/86, would have been the second anniversary of Gary's disappearance. Then a few weeks later, another message was found, this time scratched into a sidewalk. The message read, "Gary Grant Jr. lives, I still killed him. Son of a pig officer. Payback is an MF." This is where the official investigation and reporting stops. Unofficially, Gary Sr. still believes that Carl had something to do with the murder or knows who was involved. There's a little more to this, which we will now cover in this next section. Allow me to expand upon my previous statement. Gary Sr. believes specifically that Carl's older brother may have been the one to kill his son. A few days before his son's death, Carl's older brother was arrested on robbery charges. Specifically, he believes that he tried to get Gary Jr. in on a scheme to use young children to rob houses, which Gary likely refused and instead said he was going to tell the police, or his father. From this, Carl's brother felt the need to silence him, obviously, by taking his life. It's also been speculated by Gary Sr. that there was an adult or someone older involved in what happened to his son. He points to his son's statement to his mother that morning, how he had an appointment that was secret that afternoon, as being evidence of this. His belief is that he was told to say something to that effect, and that this was an unnatural statement for a 7-year-old to make. Unfortunately, a lot of what Gary Grant Sr. had to say or speculate on when it came to this case was ignored. The police department handled this case and subsequently Gary Sr. very strangely. At first, he was shut out of the investigation officially, and then he was put back on the investigation. He interviewed people, worked himself to the bone trying to find information, which of course he did, this was his son. From that, he found that the police had failed in a number of places on this case. The biggest issue he saw was that they had failed to even interview Robert Huey, the man that found Gary Jr.'s body. From there, he informed the people above him that he was going to do so, did so, and was subsequently removed from the case again. After that, he states that he was shut out entirely and completely ignored. One interesting and odd twist to this case: around 2 years after Gary's death, there were 2 suspicious 911 calls that have, unfortunately, led to what feels like nowhere. One of them doesn't have audio that's available, So I'll cover that one first, but please do note that this was technically the second call made to 911 about this. In this call on June 2nd, 1986, the caller refused to tell the operator their name, but said that the person who killed Gary Jr. had confessed to killing him, and he did so because of Gary Sr., basically implicating that this was revenge for an arrest. He also said that the police knew what he looked like, saying that they, the cops, knew who the person was. The man named in the call was arrested in 2011 for sexual contact with a minor and child endangerment, to which he pled guilty. He was not and has not been charged with Gary Jr.'s death, however. This second call does have audio available. Please note again, this is the first of the two calls that was made to 911, and I will go ahead and play the audio for you now.
Mason Fire.
Oh, yes. Is it possible for me to collect a reward on my own self for the murder of Gary Grant? No, how's if I did it myself and I want to collect the own reward?
If you did it?
Yeah.
Well, suppose I hook you into Detective Bureau.
No, it's okay.
I mean, that's only you.
Make sure they know that's not a crank call. You'll never be able to catch them.
This call occurred in March of 1986, so approximately 2.5 months before the other one. From what I could find online, the man that made this call was never identified and has obviously never been charged. The list of possible suspects is slim in this case, unfortunately. The first and most obvious is Carl Mason. From everything I've read, it seems like Carl may have been involved somehow, but it also seems unlikely that he actually committed the murder. Credit being given to the polygraph tests, of course. Also, with Carl being mentally handicapped and a 12-year-old at the time, it's unlikely that he would have the wherewithal to wrap Gary up in the carpet and potentially wipe fingerprints from the metal pipe that was used to kill Gary. From here, we can expand our statement to Carl's brother. He was, apparently, arrested for robbery, and I would think that Gary Sr.'s statement about him using younger kids to commit the crime wouldn't have been made without merit or as a baseless claim. If he had wanted to recruit Gary Jr., and he said he was going to tell the police, and then did tell the police potentially, which may have led to his arrest, he would have had the motive to commit the crime. The man that was arrested in 2013 that was implicated in the June of 1986 phone call is another obvious suspect. Being charged with the crimes he was, I would say it was definitely possible that he may have tried to do something with Gary Jr., and he refused. From this, the man felt the need to keep the kid quiet. Lastly, there is the quote-unquote unknown person or persons. This would include the author of the note written on the police car, the author of the note on the sidewalk, and then the caller that asked about turning himself in and getting the reward. I say person or persons, as there's obviously no proof that this was just a single person, and it could have been others just basically trying to taunt the police, and not legitimate messages or statements made by people involved in the crime. Disclaimer. This is my opinion, solely my opinion only. It is not your opinion, it is not necessarily a popular opinion or unpopular opinion, it is solely the opinion of me as the Raven Dreams. I have two main thoughts on this case, two opinions on what is the most likely scenario. The first is that the implicated man, the one arrested in 2013 on the molestation charges, is the one responsible. The fact that he claimed to have committed the acts in a manner of bragging to his friends makes me feel like he should be highest on the list. I also read that the reason he was arrested for the charges he was that somebody called in an anonymous tip saying that he had told them. Apparently this guy had a tendency to brag about his crimes to those that he knew, a pattern that obviously landed him in prison and makes him look best for this whole case. The second possibility, Carl's brother. Carl's brother was a criminal arrested for robbery and apparently tried to use younger kids to commit his crimes for him. It's definitely possible that he had tried to recruit Gary, the thought process most likely being that if he did agree with it, he wouldn't tell anyone because his father was a police officer and he wouldn't have wanted to get in trouble. This would help to explain the appointment statement, basically the older brother thinking he was being clever by telling the child to say this when asked what he had to do that day. On top of this, Carl, being Gary's friend, he was probably used to try and convince Gary, used basically as a lure. When Gary said no and that he was going to report him, Carl's brother took his life. I believe if this was the case, Carl was there and saw it happen, but seeing as how his brother would have been an authority figure in his life, he didn't tell anybody. The main unknown variable for me: who wrote the messages and who made that call? If either of those things are ever figured out, then this case would be able to most likely be solved or taken in a direction that could point to an actual ending. That is to say, the person that made the phone call and wrote those messages actually had something to do with the case. If it's discovered that they were not done by the person who actually killed Gary, it would obviously be a dead end. It has been 34 years since Gary Grant Jr. was found in the vacant lot, just down the street from his own house. With the possibilities listed here, the lights remain dim as they shine on this case. It's a sad truth that, again, unless there's a confession that is acquired in the appropriate way, there likely won't be answers. It seems that in this case, there's just too little in ways of actual damning evidence. The possibilities are endless, but the probabilities are low, meaning that the certainties are just non-existent. That all said, what do you all think? Do you think Carl was guilty and should have been charged? Do you think that maybe he knew who committed the crime but was too scared to tell anyone? Do you think the person taunting the police with messages or the person that made the phone call had anything to actually do with the murder itself? Do you think the man arrested in 2013, the one that supposedly bragged about killing Gary Grant Jr., was actually the one who did it? Let me know in the comments below if you have any thoughts, questions, or just beliefs or want to discuss this case further. I will see you all on the next Raven Investigates, but until then, this is Raven, signing off. Sleep well.